Voila! Exclaimed Annie, winking at the camera lens. With this makeup, you can go both to a social gala or to the funeral of your ex. Annie laughed at her own black joke, then sent an air kiss to the camera and turned it off. After that, she sighed heavily, as if carrying the entire vault of heaven on her thin shoulders, like the mythological Atlas. Although, probably, even the Titan complained less about his life than Annie at this moment. Annie picked up her phone and opened her latest video, scrolling through the comments. With each word, sentence or emoji she read or saw, her mood dropped and her eyebrows drew together at the bridge of her nose. "What ungrateful people!" she raged, blocking the smartphone and throwing it on the table. She leaned back in the pink chair and stared at the neon-lit ceiling. Annie Cargill, known on the World Wide Web as Annie OK, was a top beauty blogger. She had everything she had never dreamed of before: money, fame, popularity, and several 100,000 subscribers. Advertising offers poured in on her like a cornucopia, which helped her pay for such a beautiful life. Her apartment was located in one of the elite complexes. Annie bought up brands and indulged in some of the sins like pride. She had also learned to lie, something she had never done before. Annie grew up in an orphanage at the age of 13 after losing her only guardian, her grandmother. Of course, no one was rushing to take a grown girl into the family, so she stayed under the care of the state until she came of age. After graduation, Annie went to study PR at college and met Nick. Soon he became her best friend and then her agent. The thing was that Annie discovered her talent for makeup when she was still in the orphanage. There she often painted the girls with dried mascara and a meagre set of shadows that smelled like latex gloves. But the girls were enamored with their young makeup artist and couldn't tear themselves away from the mirror for long periods of time. During their third year of study at college, the teacher gave the students a course task. "I suggest you divide into groups of 2 or 3 people," said the teacher. "You should create an account on social media, and then you should start to publicize content and promote it." The students split into 2 camps. Some whined that they didn't want to join the ranks of bloggers, while others got excited. "Whoever collects the most subscribers by the end of the semester, I'll admit your exam automatically," the teacher added, providing a solid incentive. Then everyone got excited. Of course, Annie and Nick teamed up. They were united in their desire to pass the exam easily. "What are we going to blog about?" asked Annie when they got into the dormitory. "What are people interested in nowadays?" Nick glanced at how beautifully the tip of Annie's nose glistened, and on her cheekbones stars shimmered. Today she was wearing funny makeup again and looked like a fairy. Nick suddenly thought that most likely his friend had spent the entire scholarship on cosmetics and he should feed her. "What about you?" he suggested suddenly. Annie blinked and wrinkled her nose. "Can't you think of a more boring topic? My life consists of you and studying. I live in a dorm with a mean roommate. One of them steals my cookies, by the way." Nick snorted with laughter. "No, I'm serious, Annie. You asked what people were interested in. There are many teenagers on the internet. You could show off your makeup, tell about your past, share your thoughts. You are much more interesting than many such bloggers." At the time, Annie only laughed. However, time was passing and there were no new ideas. Although the thought of becoming a blogger both frightened and beckoned to the girl, finally she said yes. The nickname Annie OK was picked by Nick. It was their private joke. When they met and Nick recognized her name, he sang lines from Michael Jackson's hit song, seeing how she was worried before the seminar. "Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie?" Gritting her teeth, Annie mumbled back, "Annie is okay." Since then, he often called his friend Annie OK, which symbolically became the beginning of her new career in the world of blogging. Nick and Annie leveraged Annie's best traits and difficult past. Annie was not ashamed of it and spoke frankly. Therefore, seeing her sincerity, people stayed on the girl's page. Some were curious, someone felt sorry for her, and others admired her humour, beauty, and ability to make up. Nick helped Annie with everything from setting up lights and cameras to editing scripts and communicating with other bloggers to promote her. The result of their labour was an A on the exam, but they didn't stop there. That's when it all began. Annie rose to the top of fame. By the end of college, she had become a popular influencer and not the last person in the beauty world. Now, she didn't even buy cosmetics. They were sent free of charge by well-known brands, but only if she put on makeup with their product. As a result, Annie changed. She tasted the forbidden fruit, but not from the tree of knowledge, but from the tree of fame. She revelled in it and eventually crossed the line. Annie was recently involved in a scandal or two. Therefore, instead of admiring Annie's new pictures and videos, people discussed in the comments what a wretch she had become. I subscribed to Annie a long time ago when she joked a lot and talked about life in the orphanage. I learned makeup from her lessons. However, now I don't trust her. Unsubscribing, someone wrote in the comments. How fame changes people. Annie OK used to be the sweetest blogger, and now she's just like everyone else, another subscriber wrote. And such comments appeared with each passing day. Worse still, sponsors began to back out. Not all of them, of course. Some liked the black PR as well, but most of them withdrew their offers, not wanting to smear their reputation. The thing was that Annie, in a purse for big money, agreed to advertise a bad product, although Nick tried to talk her out of it. As a result, the cosmetics, which she carefully promoted, caused skin and health problems for her subscribers. One even ended up in hospital with chemical burns. To make matters worse, Annie's boyfriend Mark, also a blogger and athlete, publicly shamed her. He posted a video where she spoke badly about the subscribers who went to the hospital. Am I to blame for this? If they, like a herd of blind and stupid sheep, are ready to spend money on everything that bloggers advise, then I advise them to buy books and train their brains instead. And I didn't force them to buy those cosmetics. Annie said all this in her heart, on her emotions, because it was her first public scandal. And of course, she did not know that Mark filmed her on the phone and broadcast it. So the guy decided to declare their breakup and, as they say, catch the hype. Suddenly the phone rang. Annie saw Nick's name and pouted. Only do not read me morals again, please. She threw instead of, hello, yes, I admit you were right. Mark used me for the sake of hype, and it was a mistake to advertise cosmetics. Are you happy now? Nick snorted, and then to Annie's surprise, calmly asked, Annie, are you okay? Annie blinked and then sobbed. Annie is not okay at all. The girl was relieved by this short dialogue. It was as if she could briefly go back to a past where she wasn't such an evil idiot. Annie, I figured out how to whitewash your reputation, she informed her friend and agent. Annie sniffed and perked her ears. I'm all ears. There is an annual charity event at the Children's Hospital, and you have been invited to attend as an animator. Hospital? The blogger gasped. But there are sick people there. Well, that's the point of the existence of the hospitals, replied Nick sarcastically. Gather people in wards and then treating them. No, you don't get it, Annie said, wrinkling her nose in distaste as she looked at her manicure. I don't want to get any illness or rashes. How am I supposed to put on makeup afterward? And it's going to be difficult for me to act on camera, you know. When I see sick kids, it makes me squeamish. I've had it since the orphanage. I hate hospitals. I was sent there a couple of times. The nurses treated me and the other kids from the orphanage badly, like we shouldn't get used to the good life. And, by the way, some of the children come there with shingles. No, I can't go back there." "Are you done?" Nick yawned into the phone. "Anyway, the event is this Sunday in the morning, so no clubs on Saturday. You'll be given a costume, and luckily, you've already learned how to smile falsely." Annie heard the irritation in Nick's voice that wasn't there before. "Nick, what is wrong with you?" she gasped. "Are you asking me?" "Annie, it's me who should have this question to you. What's wrong?" "What's wrong with you, Annie? You know, I was on your side for a long time, but you really became different. Entirely different person." The guy exhaled nervously. "Anyway, I'll be waiting for you at the hospital. Bye." Then he hung up the phone, and Annie stared blankly at the wall in front of her, thinking about her unpleasant situation. A couple of days later, on Sunday morning, Annie stood in the room where the medical staff usually rested and looked at her reflection with horror. "It's a complete nightmare," she grumbled, looking at the fairy costume. The outfit included a lettuce tutu skirt, a kind of shiny leotard taken from some gymnast, wings that dangled behind her back, and a magic wand with a star on the end. Annie thought sarcastically that the costume was 99% synthetic and another 1% shame. "Okay, Annie, okay. Pull yourself together," the blogger said, taking a deep breath and then smiling radiantly. Her lips trembled and the smile almost came off like a mask when she remembered Nick's words. "You've learned to smile falsely." The combative attitude nearly left Annie, but she picked herself and her wand up and walked out into the hospital corridor. The children were gathered in the playroom. Animators were already walking among them, a pirate, a panda, and a princess. The fairy slipped into the crowd and began posing for the cameras. She smiled at the children, rubbed their hair, and even hugged some of them, feeling a strange feeling. Annie didn't like it here. She felt bad. It was like she was looking into her past. Suddenly, among the clamouring, enthusiastic patients of the children's hospital, she noticed one girl with short hair and wearing old clothes. She sat on the sidelines, watching the festivities like a spectator, not wanting to participate. During the whole time, the girl never smiled or said a word. Annie squinted at the child, feeling vaguely uneasy, as the little girl looked at the fairy with a pensive gaze. "This is a silent one, Molly. She doesn't talk," said the nurse, who was standing next to the blogger. "Really?" Annie blinked. "Why? From birth?" The nurse shrugged her shoulders. "I don't think so. She is from an orphanage. They're all like that there, with peculiarities," she remarked, then blushed thickly and looked at the blogger. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. In general, I am your subscriber, and I think that Mark did wrong." Annie fictitiously smiled and thanked the girl for her support. Meanwhile, Mark had already managed to appear in her life again. When Annie posted a photo of herself in the fairy costume with a note that she was going to please the children, he sent her a few hearts and a nasty message. "Maybe later you could borrow a costume from the nurse and come to please me." Reading this message, Annie blocked him immediately. She couldn't understand where her ex got the nerve. "It seems that only Nick is left among decent men," the girl thought to herself. Her faithful friend was also in the hospital. He didn't wear a costume, but he happily entertained the children. Annie even admired him when he was playing with the kids. He caught her glance and beckoned to her. The fairy, having adjusted her skirt, made her way towards the crowd of young patients. "And now, our beautiful fairy, Tinkerbell, will listen to your wishes. Who knows, maybe one of them will come true," said Nick, looking slyly at his little friend. And Annie suddenly realized that he was no longer angry. Nick rarely got angry with her. They didn't even argue. The children surrounded Annie and began shouting their wishes. "I want a doll with long hair," shouted a girl. "And I want a new smartphone," declared a boy. "I want a dog. No, maybe a cat." But a dog, actually. The little boy couldn't make up his mind. The fairy patiently nodded and waved her magic wand, assuring them that she would try to fulfill their wishes. But for the magic to happen, you must behave well, and also be brave and strong. Drink your medicine and obey the doctors, Annie said. Also, your wish must come from the heart and be cherished, you know? Then suddenly, someone pulled her skirt. Annie turned around and saw the same girl named Molly, who had been sitting lonely in the corner. Annie remembered that Molly didn't speak and felt uncomfortable. The girl pointed with her hand for Annie to lean closer. Annie hesitated, then carefully squatted down to the girl's level. To her amazement, the little girl took a breath and spoke. "Dear, beautiful fairy," the girl began politely and leisurely, "could you fulfill my most cherished wish?" Unable to speak, Annie nodded. The girl's face lit up with a smile, transforming her previously frowning expression. "More than anything, I want to see my brother again. He promised to come back to me when winter came, but he never came." Annie swallowed nervously as she looked at the little girl, who froze in anticipation, folding her arms in a dignified manner. Meanwhile, the girl nodded at the magic wand. "Will you wave it to make it happen?" Annie, coming out of her daze, waved her wand, her hand and heart trembling. The little girl's wish was not like other children's requests for toys or pets, but for a brother. Annie played with the children for a while longer, but Molly remained on her mind. She didn't know why, maybe because of her past, or the little girl's huge and sincere eyes that looked at her with hope. Annie unexpectedly found herself wanting to fulfill that hope. The next day on Monday she went to the orphanage. On the way she expressed her thoughts to Nick. "They can't separate siblings, it's not legal." "Maybe she just considered someone her brother," suggested Nick, sitting behind the wheel. Annie, overcome with excitement, began to gnaw on her thumbnail. Nick glanced at her and grinned. "Old habits die hard." The girl blushed, embarrassed, and hid her hand in her pocket. "It's just nerves." The director of the orphanage waved her hands and said, "Molly was recently transferred to us due to health problems. She lived in another town, and there was no good hospital there. I can find out which orphanage she had been living in, but you know, it's private information." Annie and Nick looked at each other and understood. Nick took out his wallet and asked, "And how much is this information worth?" The principal's eyes lit up, and soon Annie had a new address. The orphanage was indeed in another town, but that didn't stop Annie. She went there, but was not welcomed as cordially as at the first one. "I don't remember any Molly," said the obese and insolent principal, adjusting her glasses, and Annie thought she would leave empty-handed. However, she was recognized by one of the teachers, who secretly told Annie the whole truth. "I remember Molly and her brother. I had just started working here then, which is why I remembered them so well and became attached to them," she shared with Annie. Molly and Paul Bogolyubov were sent to the orphanage when they were taken away from their alcoholic mother and her boyfriend. Molly didn't talk to anyone except her brother. "Why?" asked Annie, with growing tenderness for this little girl every second. "She didn't trust adults and didn't want to communicate with anyone," answered the teacher. "The psychologist who talked to them said that her mother always scolded the girl, and if she cried, she would yell at her to shut up and beat her. So the girl withdrew into herself. Only her brother defended her." "But how come they were separated, especially if the little girl was so attached to her brother?" exclaimed Annie. The teacher looked over her shoulder, making sure no one was around. Despite the fact that it was forbidden to separate the children, Paul was quickly placed in a family. He was a very handsome boy, smart and an athlete. Such children are dreamed of. Molly was often sick and they didn't want to take her. Who needs a mute and sickly child? She was younger than Paul, and her mother, when she was carrying the girl, drank and even took something forbidden. Paul didn't want to go to a new family. He was stubborn, angry, and even hit the gym teacher. But he was threatened. They said he had to go. They explained that then Molly could also be taken away to the family, and soon. But the two children would not be taken away. They told him many bad things. In the end, he gave up. He was sent to a family abroad, somewhere in Europe. The teacher pressed her lips together unhappily. I'm sure that the principal sold our Paul like a thoroughbred horse, she grumbled, shaking her head. I haven't heard from him since. Thank you. Annie thanked the woman, and then on impulse, she hugged her. The teacher shuddered and then even wept, saying, Believe me, I also wish them well, but I am just a little person. Annie returned, filled with determination to fulfill the girl's wishes, and she did what she knew how to do. She made a splash on the internet. Blogger Annie OK wrote posts searching for information. Her subscribers split into two camps. Some argued, she does it for hype. Others defended the girl. Even if so, she is doing a good deed. What's the difference? Annie stopped reading the comments, unable to sleep or eat until she found the little girl's brother. And then one day, Nick came to her and said, frightened, Annie, you are pale with black eyes. You shouldn't treat yourself that way. He handed his friend a glass of coffee and a croissant from her favourite coffee shop. I can't help it, Nick. Annie looked anxiously out the window. It's the end of fall. Soon the snow will fall. Molly will be waiting again, because I gave her hope again. Well, not me, but the fairy. Anyway, you know what I mean. Annie swallowed nervously and put the food away. She turned away from Nick, ashamedly hiding the tears glistening in her eyes. You know, I never told you because I wanted to seem strong, but I also always hoped that someone would come for me. I knew it was impossible, but that's why I didn't want to go to the hospital, where I could encounter orphans. Everything inside of me shrinks when I see such abandoned children. Nick leaned over to the girl and hugged her. She snuggled into his shoulder and rubbed her cheek against his prickly wool sweater. Nick always wore such sweaters. Why do you wear these sweaters? She whispered, swallowing back tears. I have to tell you about the existence of soft cashmere. Nick laughed softly and his chest vibrated pleasantly. First I'll start with a sweater made of cashmere, and then I'll end up with not strong coffee, but decaf coffee with almond milk. No way. Annie snorted with laughter and raised her gaze to Nick. Their eyes met, and her heart did a somersault. He had always been incredibly handsome, and that had been Annie's first thought when she had seen Nick in her freshman year. She had even fallen in love with him, but she preferred to remain friends. After all, it was much easier to lose a lover than a friend. Now, however, something had cracked, fractured and changed. The air felt heavier, and the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the guy's perfume with woody notes. Annie's breath caught when Nick touched her lips with his gaze and then looked into her eyes again. His brown eyes darkened. Annie, I want to say, a long time ago, in general, he began huskily, and at that moment Annie's phone rang. She abruptly pulled away from her friend and grabbed her smartphone. Hi, she said nervously, then jumped up. What? Really? No way. Yes, of course it is. Yes. When she hung up the phone, tears were streaming down her cheeks. Nick, I found him, she whispered, and then she threw herself into the arms of her best friend. He lives in Germany, and he was looking for his sister, but when she was transferred to our city, the string broke. He was so nervous and seemed happy. I can't believe it. It worked. Nick only sighed, holding Annie close to him and thinking about the fact that his confession had failed again. However, he had been waiting for this moment for many years and could wait a little longer. Molly, you have visitors, the teacher called the little girl. She was leafing through a book lying on the floor. The girl nodded, stood up, fixed her skirt and followed the woman. She was often taken to see someone, doctors, psychologists, potential parents. She had gotten used to it, like brushing her teeth or braiding her hair. The girl entered the office and looked up, freezing in place. There stood the fairy from the hospital, with her brother by her side. "Molly," whispered Paul, taking a step forward. "Molly, I'm sorry, I've been looking for you. I swear, Molly didn't let him finish. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing. Annie, witnessing the scene, also burst into tears. Nick elbowed her in the side. "Miss Blogger, why aren't you filming the finale of this story? The likes would have been in the millions," he kidded his friend. "You know, I forgot my phone at home when I rushed to the airport to pick up Paul," admitted Annie, wiping her tears. "And I don't care about that. I want to live this moment entirely. I don't want to share it with anyone." "Then I'm leaving?" Nick snorted offensively. Annie laughed and took his hand. "I don't want to share this moment with anyone but the closest person to me," Annie said, hiding her gaze under her wet lashes. Nick intertwined their fingers. Annie looked at the brother and sister again, knowing that they had found each other and wouldn't lose each other now. Nick was of age and was going to take custody of his sister. At that moment, Annie remembered what real, sincere happiness was, and she was no longer going to trade it for the false glitter of the virtual world. She turned to the window. The first snow started falling.